John McMullen might remember John Walkenfuss. You remember him, John?
Of course I do. I think he was a Detroit, Kansas City player. That's my guess.
I don't remember which team he played for, but I do remember a John Walkenfuss when I was collecting baseball cards. You know,
it's a great name.
Here's a question I had the other day. I don't know that you can answer this question, but you would think I could answer this question more so than any of us. But do kids' baseball gloves still have a player autograph, like in the palm of the mitt?
Well, I never look. I hope they do.
Like mine had. I had a Mike Schmidt glove for a while. Roger Clemens. I had a Roger Clemens. You know, the glove had Roger Clemens's. Who was yours?
I had Scott Rowland. I remember.
Scott Rowland?
Yeah.
Wow.
If only I played a little bit like him.
If my friends were here, they would say I had, Ty Cobb or Babe Ruth. They'd make an age joke.
By the way, John Walkenfuss played for the Tigers, and he had a cup of coffee with the Phillies for 2 seasons.
Did not remember that.
6 bombs, and he hit 289. He was a great Philly. All right, John Walkenfuss references behind us. Let's take a look at the Eagles, the Super Bowl champions, day 5 of training camp. And, John, of course.
Super Bowl champions? I wouldn't have known that by the 67 logos I pass on the way to the field every day.
They went live for the first time today.
Yes, they did. So that's always a big moment. I think it was a bigger moment for certain players, Jordan Hicks, for instance. But Carson Wentz and Jason Peters, 2 of the players rehabbing, did not take part in those drills as they continue their rehabs from their respective ACL injuries. Jordan Hicks, though, was back. Darren Sproles, obviously back. And remember, when Chip Kelly was here, we never had any live periods. So it brings a little excitement, even though they don't happen very often. I think Doug had 2 days last year where there were certain live periods, probably be 2 this year, maybe 3 at the most. Obviously nothing like the old days when you had 2-a-days and a lot of live periods, but it does bring a little bit of excitement to what can be mundane.
Yes. Well, it's funny. We wait for it. We yearn for it to get here. And then once it gets here, we're ready to move on to the next portion, which is an opening preseason game a week from tomorrow. And then once that first preseason game is over, we're ready for the season to get here. But Carson Wentz, he's at the top of the list. He was a story the first couple days because of his activity, and now he's a story because of his lack of activity.
Well, he's always going to be a story because he's the starting quarterback, and he's going to be a story no matter what. But certainly coming off the ACL, not only that, there was also an LCL. And the timetable, it's just it's so interesting. We've talked about it for months, Mike. It's 9 months. Got injured on December 10th. Had surgery on the 13th. 9 months from that day is September 13th, which is exactly a week after Game 1 against Atlanta. So it's almost eerie, the timing. But, we can talk about it from a micro standpoint and say, well, on Saturday, Carson was in team drills. He looked great. And then Sunday, they peeled him back. And today, they didn't let him take part in the live portion of practice or team drills again and think that's backtracking. But it's not. It's a plan, and the goal is week 1. It's not really important that he's on the field July 31st at the NovaCare complex. It's important he's on the field September 6th, and he's way ahead of even someone like me thought he was going to be, and I always thought he'd be there week 1. So he's way ahead of schedule.
Yeah, I mean, the narrative the first day, he was in the 11-on-11s, and he was running around, scrambling, making throws on the run, and it was like, if anybody thought he wasn't going to be ready, just take a look at that. And then now they've kind of, slowed him back. And you wrote about it. They're just following the plan they had for him. It seems like, give him a couple days, see how he handles it, pull him back a little bit. But there are other guys, one of which was the MVP of the Super Bowl, and that is Nick Foles. Does Foles appear to have any Super Bowl MVP hangover? I mean, did he get fat and happy this offseason, or does he look sharp?
No, I don't think that's in Nick's nature. He's just not that type of guy to be sort of satisfied with just one Super Bowl or even satisfied being a backup quarterback. He's always going to prepare to be the starter. And it's a difficult situation for him because he is the Super Bowl MVP. He probably could be, not probably, could definitely be a starter elsewhere in this league. But here, he's obviously below Carson Wentz in the pecking order, and he should be. But it's still, from his standpoint, it's a difficult situation. But if anybody can handle it and handle it in a professional manner, it's Nick Foles, and that's why the Eagles are so comfortable with the situation, because they know typically if you have a situation like this, Mike, you're going to have a controversy, and you're going to have players griping. And that's just not Nick Foles. He's not going to do it. So that's one of the reasons the Eagles are comfortable going another year with a quarterback that's the Super Bowl MVP and is going to be the backup.
And then they have a future MVP, Nate Sudfeld, on the roster.
Well, according to Matt Collins, that's a little bit of hyperbole. But Nate, I'll tell you what, Nate is a very good developmental prospect, and that's all you can ask for as the third quarterback in this league, is somebody who has the potential to develop down the road. And he does. I mean, he's got everything from a skill set standpoint it takes to be a starter in this league. He's big. He's 6'6". He's got the arm strength. He's got more mobility than you think he does. He's very similar athletically to Nick, in fact. They're both 6'6". They're both sort of you tend to think of people that tall as not being that mobile, and they're not going to be confused with the Cam Newtons of the world or the Russell Wilsons of the world or even an Aaron Rodgers who can move around, even Carson Wentz when he's healthy. But they're more athletic than you think they are. So he's got everything you want in a third quarterback. And then you got Joe Callahan, who was the star of practice today. It's South Jersey's own. And I say this about Joe, and I joke, obviously he's not going to make this team barring injury, and I don't know if he wants this on his book jacket, but if you go back to last year, and remember, Nate wasn't here yet, and it was Carson, it was Nick, and Nick was injured a lot, so it was the summer of Matt McGloin. And Joe Callahan's a heck of a lot better than Matt McGloin.
Talk with John McMullen at JF McMullen on Twitter. He is at the Eagles training camp, and of course, as you mentioned, Callahan was kind of the star. He extended things and found a player that made a play that a lot of people have been talking about. It just shows you the depth at this position that the Eagles have, and that Callahan was able to kind of shine amongst these guys. Obviously does a good job for him in terms of maybe finding a home someplace else.
Yeah, and that's what he's doing. I mean, and we talked about, mentioned last year, the summer, how much Matt McGloin played. I mean, this year it's going to be Nate Sudfeld and it's going to be Joe Callahan. You're going to see a ton of them in the preseason, and that's where he gets an opportunity to not only show the Eagles in case there is that injury, but also show other teams. Everybody's always looking for quarterbacks, whether it be a backup third stringer. And, he proved himself in Green Bay, and he sort of learned under Aaron Rodgers for parts of the last two seasons. And you could see it today. He did sort of that Rodgers pirouette today. I call it where he spun out and he throws a touchdown. He's gotten to learn. Talk about Doug. Look at the head coach. I mean, one of the reasons Doug Peterson became Doug Peterson is because he got to play with Dan Marino and Brett Favre and even Donovan McNabb here. And already Joe Callahan's gotten to play with Aaron Rodgers and Carson Wentz. That's pretty good.
Yeah, John, along with Wentz, Jason Peters also back. How is he, I guess he was held out today, but how has he handled coming back from that injury? I mean, he's an older guy.
Yeah, he is, and that's part of it. I think people overreact to the fact that like today, they held him out of the live drills. Occasionally, for the first 4 practices, he's been in the vast majority of plays the first team was out there. But every once in a while, they'll rotate Vaitai in. You know, he's 36 years old. They would be doing that even if he wasn't coming off an injury. You want him on a pitch count. There's no need for Jason Peters to be going all out every day in training camp. I mean, you want to sort of extend his shelf life as much as possible. So you hear that term pitch count for a lot of different reasons. Carson's on a pitch count. Jason's on a pitch count as well. There's no need for him to be burning himself out 90 degrees and humidity, and it's just you got to be smart with veteran players. And that's another part where Doug has understood from being a 13-year veteran. He's done it since he's got here.
Yep. And
he's given them days every once in a while.
Then Brandon Brooks was back after missing the other day with dehydration. You had a bunch of different guys stepping in at the right guard spot yesterday. Shelton Gibson, Matt Jones, 2 guys I guess you could say are fighting for roster spots. Neither one of those are a home run to make the team. They both had to leave practice. And of those 2, Gibson and Jones kind of handicapped their ability to make this team.
Well, I think Shelton's got a real good opportunity because of his value on special teams more than anything else. If you're going to be the 5th or 6th receiver on an NFL team, you have to be able to contribute on special teams. That's one of the reasons he started to play at the end of last season, because he turned into a pretty good gunner as a coverage guy, and now he's been working as the second-team kickoff returner behind Corey Clement. So that adds to his value, and there's no question he's more comfortable as a receiver. He's not dropping balls. Last year we were talking about it. He would drop balls in individual drills. He was just sort of overwhelmed by the move in competition, the sort of the advanced offense they run here with all the different routes. He was always trying to think about it. And in West Virginia, it was a very simple offensive system. So he admitted he struggled with that change. And now that he understands it, he feels more comfortable. He's producing more at wide receiver. On Sunday, he made the play of the day. He went up between Malcolm Jenkins and Ronald Darby and got an underthrown Nick Foles pass. And that's, hey, Jenkins and Darby, that's pretty good. And Doug has gone out of his way to mention him a couple times. So I think he's got the inside track. Certainly looked like it was a concussion-type injury. I don't know if he's been diagnosed, but he looked a little shaky when he was walking off the field. So I don't think it's going to be anything serious or long-term. Matt Jones, I think it depends on the preseason, because if you look at his history in Washington, the guy can play in this league, but he just fumbled and fumbled and fumbled. And he's got to prove that he can hold on to the football. And I think if he does that, I think he's got a chance to make the team.
Jordan Hicks, his name has come up. He got some work at the outside linebacker spot, which is kind of interesting considering the first week of the year they're going to be without Nigel Bradham. But how is that linebacking core looking? That's one spot. I think if you were to ask Eddie, they are seemingly the cornerback position from last year.
Yeah, I mean, there's no depth. There's no proven depth, at least behind Jordan Hicks and Nigel Bradham. And obviously everybody's concerned because of Jordan's history of injuries. He's played 3 seasons, 2 of them cut short by injuries. And even if you go back to Texas, he was sort of had that injury-prone tag in college. When they're out there, the Eagles are fine. I mean, they're 3 down linebackers, and they're both very good. Jordan Hicks and Nigel Bradham, and often they're interchangeable. That's why Jim Schwartz wants to cross-train, because he almost wants those 2 to be able to mix and match positions so you can fuse the offense even a little bit more. And I think that ultimately he'll get to that point. The question becomes if one of them gets hurt, and you'll see it week 1, as you mentioned, Nigel will be suspended, so he will not be available. Then what happens? Last year you had Michael Kendricks. That was great. insurance, and he stepped up and he played well. This year it's a bunch of unknowns, and it's Corey Nelson, it's Nate Gary, it's Camus Grugier-Hill, even Joe Walker in the conversation.
Yeah.
One of those guys is going to have to play in the base defense, and God forbid if one of the two linebackers gets hurt, then you have some real question marks, because it's not going to be Michael Kendricks this time. If you're forced into that type of situation, it's going to be a significant downgrade.
There's a lot of things going on. And one guy I want to know about more is Sidney Jones. I've been hearing a lot of slot with him. What kind of read do you have on what they're thinking about for Sidney?
Well, they want to get him on the field. He's a really talented guy, and I today was back in the slot. We've had 5 practices, and they've sort of rotated between him and Devontae Ballsby. It's been Jones, Ballsby, Jones, Ballsby, Jones again. So he's got the lead 3-2 as the first-team nickelback. I personally, I don't understand why you would want Sidney Jones playing the nickelback slot. I think he's too talented. I think he should be outside the numbers, dealing with the best receivers in this league. And I have a funny feeling that's ultimately how it's going to be. I still think Jalen Mills will probably kick inside when they put the nickel defense on the field, and Sidney will be outside. But it's pretty clear they want to get him on the field. And then Devontae Ballsby has been sort of one of the big stories of the spring and into the summer, made another big play today, intercepted Nick Foles on a fade to Zach Ertz. He could be sort of that plan B or plan C. If he wins the slot and proves he can play in there,
right,
then all of a sudden you have an embarrassment of riches, because you got a lot of really good corners on the outside. And even then you could start talking about potential. You mentioned the Major League Baseball trade deadline. Well, tomorrow's August, and Howie Roseman always makes trades in August. Always. And there's going to be some guys on the move. And if a guy like Ballsby can prove he can play, then he can maybe deal Ronald Darby. You'll hear some others, Isaac Seumalo. Yeah, because remember, Mike, this is his last year on his rookie deal. So the Eagles know he's a good player, and he's going to make a lot of money next year. And they have a lot of depth. So you start to weigh it. Do you want to pay a good cornerback that much money that he's going to demand? And they could potentially, I'm not saying it's going to happen, but it's one of those things that Howie loves, moving and shaking. And if they have an excess at a particular position.
Yeah. We didn't get to see a whole heck of a lot of Darby last year because he was hurt. I mean, he missed, 10, 11 games last year. But does trading him to you make sense on the field?
No, it doesn't, because this is a Super Bowl level team, and you want to kind of go all in again.
Right,
and
exactly.
From that standpoint, not necessarily.
Like if I'm making a move that's contract oriented, I sound like a team that's thinking about a year or two down the road, not now.
Well, yeah, I get your point, but you also got to be smart about it. And what I'm saying, if Ballsby proves to be a good nickelback, all of a sudden the dominoes start to fall. You want Sidney Jones on the field. He's your most talented cornerback.
Yep.
And then you have Jalen Mills, who you know is a good player, Pro Bowl alternate, who's very, very cost-effective for 2 more years. So, Howie's trying to build this thing for not only this year but next year. So all of that plays into it, and you start asking yourself, well, if Sidney's going to be on the field, that means – and Ballsby's going to be in the nickel because he's suited. And, again, these are just scenarios. Well, then all of a sudden somebody, whether it's Jalen or Ronald Darby, is going to lose at least some playing time because you want to get Sidney Jones on the field. So, and then they like Rasul Douglas. I mean, people forget about Rasul because he's kind of buried because they have so many good corners. And they think they have depth at that position. But this is all assuming a guy like Ballsby steps up and Jim Schwartz is comfortable with.
What about the, safety spot? You got the 2 guys there, and we've talked a lot about, their interest in possibly bringing back Graham. Is there a third guy that's stepping up right now? I know Sullivan was a guy that had some intrigue, but there's a lot of young names battling for the backup safety spot.
Yeah, and that's why we all kind of think Corey's going to be back at some point. To be honest, I mean, Corey said he wants to play. He's not signed anywhere else, but he has not said he wants to be in training camp. So, and remember, they signed him last year in August. So they didn't have him this time last year. So they're comfortable bringing him in later. But of the players in camp, yeah, I mean, Trey's the third safety right now and very similar to linebacker. The Eagles like his potential, but he's an undrafted free agent last year who spent some time on the practice squad. There's no experience. Obviously he's not proven as a player. So, one of the underreported strengths of the Eagles defense last year was when Patrick Robinson seized the nickelback slot. Now, not only the fact that Patrick played so well, that's the obvious part of it, but that gave Jim Schwartz the comfort to say, I don't have to play Malcolm Jenkins there. I can move him all over the field. And the second part of that would be, well, if you move Malcolm all over the field, somebody's got to come in and play his safety position, and that was Corey Graham. And one of the reasons the Eagles felt comfortable with that is because they understood he's a very smart player, very savvy player. It was going to be very assignment disciplined each and every play. I just don't think Jim Schwartz is going to feel that way about any first-year player. And that's what Trey is because he was on the practice squad, but he's never played before.
Last one for you, Donnell Pumphrey. I know last year you would constantly talk about his size, how small he is. He's just not ready. But is he a guy that looks like he could help out this team?
Well, I don't know if he can help out this team this year, but I think Donnell's going to make the team at the IO 2019 because Darren Sproles has already indicated will be his last year for good. He won't be back, and the Eagles have always envisioned him as sort of that replacement third down back type. I don't necessarily agree with that. I don't think he could be a replacement for Darren Sproles, but that's the Eagles' belief. He did break a couple tackles today, which I thought was a very good sign because you did not see him break tackles last year. So he is a little bit bigger. He is a little bit stronger. But then again, we talked to Jim Schwartz, and Jim Schwartz was complaining about the tackling and mentioning the defense hasn't tackled since February. And maybe it was because they couldn't tackle Donnell Pumphrey, but you didn't hear that from me.
All right, for more on today's training camp, check out 973ESPN.com. Every day, follow John McMullen on Twitter at JFMcMullen for pictures and tweets from the Eagles training camp. The Super Bowl champs are back in action a week from Thursday night against the Pittsburgh Steelers, and you can hear it right here on 97.3 ESPN. Thanks, John.
Hey, thanks, Mike.